And we should be live. Hello, John Picozzi. How are you?
Oh, I'm doing great. How are you?
Awesome. Good, good. Hey, welcome to the ROI in You Career Success Tips show, which we do as a podcast. And we are broadcasting to Facebook Live. And our goal here is to give tips and insights to emerging professionals, whether they're recent grads or anyone who may be thinking about digital marketing as a career. And you've been a digital marketer for quite a while. How did you first jump in? And if you can tell us a little bit about what you're doing now.
Yeah. So I think my background is in web development and e-commerce, and I actually surprisingly went to college for that. A lot of people in my industry do not have degrees in the things that they work in or build, which is fine. Nothing wrong with that. But I remember I actually had my previous boss had an English degree, and he was the director of engineering, which was awesome. He inevitably read all of my emails before I sent them. Like, hey, is this right? So I started off working for small agencies. Actually, out of college, started working for like a startup, and quickly realized that lifestyle wasn't really my cup of tea. So moved on to kind of incrementally bigger and bigger agencies. And more recently, within the last month and a half or so, went to work at EPAM Systems, which is a leading global provider of digital platform engineering and development services. So from agency life of a 30-person company to like a company that has 41,000 plus employees and offices all over the world. So definitely have spanned the gambit, working for companies and organizations like Oceana and Marriott International, CVS Health, and some big names. But yeah, I think my career has kind of been slightly all over the place, but in the same direction and an upward trajectory, which is what you always want with your career.
Definitely, definitely. And that's one of the things that I've been focusing on is that you definitely want to have a little bit of a plan. One of the nice things about working in journalism, as I did when I first got out, is there's a tiered system. There's the smaller paper, then the medium-sized paper, and then you go to the Boston Globe. If you don't jump from the small paper to the Globe, it just doesn't work that way. And so if you think about your trajectory and the position that you're taking now, one of our goals with ROI and You is to have students come in and learn the skills that a digital marketing agency or a digital company is really going to need students to have, because recent grads typically do not bring the skill set that agencies need. Is that what you found in your agency background?
Yeah, I think sometimes in an agency environment, it's a little bit hard for them to hire right out of college. For There are a couple different thoughts on that, right? One is it's hard to hire right out of college because they don't necessarily have the ability to be a quick starter, which means like hit the ground running and be able to be productive on a project right away, right? The other thought is that, hey, if I hire somebody right out of college, I can pay them less. So I'm going to take the time to kind of teach them the things because I'm paying them less than I would pay somebody that has more experience. So, I think, and in talking in the pre-show, one of the questions came up of like, if I had the knowledge I have now, today, back then, if I could, have all of that knowledge, would I have changed anything? And I think, looking at it holistically, I'm 37. I've had 5 or 6 professional jobs out of college, all with smaller agencies. I now work for a large company, and part of me kind of thinks that maybe I should have done that first, taken the leap into the larger company, learned how the larger company is doing it, and then been able to kind of evaluate whether I wanted to go to a smaller company or even a startup. My as I said, my startup My foyer in startups was not as great as I thought it was going to be. Maybe it would have been better if I had more knowledge under my belt, and a greater understanding of the industry that I was jumping into. So, you know, I think ultimately what it comes down to is you have to do what makes you happy. And there are a lot of factors that play into that, right? So it's figuring out, what aligns with the lifestyle that you want to lead and what aligns with your life goals, right? And each situation, don't get me wrong, each situation has pros and cons. Working for agencies, smaller agencies have a great set of pros and cons. Working for a larger company has a great set of pros and cons. But it all comes down to where you want to be and what you want to do. So I definitely agree. Like when you are, a senior in college and you're like, okay, the next step is for me to go get a job and go like build a career. You definitely want to have a real conversation with yourself and you say like, okay, what do I want to do? What are my life goals? Are my life goals to, get married, have kids, have a nice house, live in the suburbs? Do I want to go live in a city? Do I want to, go work for a nonprofit and make a difference in the world? You got to figure out where your journey is going to take you, and that leads you to figuring out what the path is to that. If you're going to um, go work for a nonprofit, there are tons of nonprofits out there that need smart people to come work for them. Pay might not be as good as if you were working for a Fortune 500 company, but you know there's a lot more that goes into it than just what do I get paid. There are other perks and benefits. So I think it really comes down to what you want to do, and how you what your game plan is. But you should definitely have a game plan. That's the takeaway there.
Yeah, well, I would say, or from what I've heard and been talking to people and researching it, that a lot of times when you graduate, you won't get hired by a bigger company. They want you to have agency experience. So just as you were telling me, I thought, oh, right, that's because the bigger companies want people who have worked at agencies, because at an agency, sort of like newspapers, right? They work you. It's a lot of work, so that they like hiring from that perspective, from with that background and experience. But that it's also nicer that you've dealt with a lot of different types of clients and done a number of different projects. So they like to see all that fresh ideas and different ways of approaching a problem. So I wonder, in your trajectory, if you would have been able to do it opposite. Not that you're not amazing and a great technologist, but just yeah, as you think back, because these are things that I've heard over the years, that it's so much easier once you've had agency experience to break into a bigger company and sort of move into working retirement compared to agency life.
Yeah, think I think it maybe depends on the industry a little bit. I think probably with newspapers, you're right on. Like that is the trajectory that you need to take, where you go smaller to bigger. I think in tech, in marketing, there are plenty of opportunities with larger companies to get in at an entry level and kind of work your way up if you want to do that, or spend a couple of years there, gain some knowledge, and then go do something else. We're very much in a if you think of your parents, right, and maybe even your parents, depending on how old you are when you listen to this, but if you think of them, like they had one job and they were at that job for like their entire career, and they retired and they had a retirement. It was great. We are very far away from that. Like I said, I'm 37 and I've had 5 to 6 professional jobs. Um, I think what makes the difference again is expectation, but also the other thing is too, you can get an internship at a large company. Large companies often have internships where agencies sometimes don't have time for interns, don't have the resources to, and this isn't all small agencies, so take this with a grain of salt, but sometimes they don't have the ability to foster that intern pool as well. So you can get in as an intern and then say, hey, I'm graduating, is there a position I could slide into here? So yeah, I think again, you got to look at your goals, and you got to look at how your career is going to progress. And my feeling is that a larger agency, you'll be able to get more information, more process away from a larger agency, and be able to actually impress the smaller agency with, like, hey, well, when we did this for Coca-Cola, did this and this, or hey, when we did this for, and possibly position yourself better in the smaller agency realm to have a higher level job. So again, depends on industry, depends on lifestyle, and I don't think there's a right answer. Either path is fine. It's your path to forge. You just have to do what's best for you. I can't hear you.
Okay, here we go. Back on track.
There we go.
We were just talking about technology and how it can be fun and challenging. Um, so I think, yeah, with the technical background, um, that there's a lot more opportunity, and I love the idea of trying to get that internship. But what do you think are some of the key components in order to get an internship or get a job? What at OOMF, the agency you were most recently at, what would they be looking for?
So that's a great question. I think it depends on position, but in the technical space, obviously we're looking for examples of work that you've done, real world examples, things that you've built, things that you're contributing to in an open source forum, organizations that you belong to, books that you've read, podcasts that you've listened to. And I think those last couple are probably true of any position, right? So looking at the organizations that you're part of, or the books that you've read, or how you stay up on your craft, so to speak, that's super important. So that's something that you're doing in college. You're learning from professors. You're reading blog posts. You're doing all this stuff, and you're just continuing to do that in your career. And in any interview I've ever been on, that's one thing where that's always been a question, like, hey, how do you stay up to date on what's going on in your space? And people learn different ways. So I'm more of a prefer to learn like instructionally. So I'll go to conferences and watch somebody give a presentation on something and ask questions. Sometimes once in a while we'll read a book, listen to podcasts quite a bit. But I think you know that's what people are looking for, and I think they're also looking for people that can um, really kind of light a fire and show that they're creative thinkers. So an interesting example here comes from Dan Pink's book, one book that I am currently reading, "To Sell is Human," which is actually a holdover from my previous job. But basically, he has an example in there. They're talking about pitching, and he uses an MBA program from a well-known school that has a certain amount of spots in it, and the school decides that they are going to only accept applications via Twitter. So now, if Twitter has a cap on how many characters you can use, and it's really easy when you have that limitation or that
Mm-hmm.
challenge to say, like, okay, well, I'm going to use all my characters as much as I can and try to jam pack this thing full of words that describes how great I am. Right? Turns out the winner wrote a haiku. So
Wow.
maybe he used 10 words
Yeah.
and he won. And if you read the haiku, you're like, okay, now I see why you won. He was able to take a limitation and be as creative as possible and show that he definitely deserved to be in this program. And I think that's really what people, employers are looking for. When you have a sea of candidates, um, you're really looking for that person who can be creative and think outside the box and use the technology and the resources at their fingertips in the most effective and creative ways.
Yeah, definitely. Well, it was interesting because I recently interviewed a recent intern who did a lot of work with Newport Interactive Marketing, and she was interviewing. Actually, she just posted that she got a new job, and in her new role, so this is her second job out of college. She graduated a year ago,
Hmm.
and yeah, so she's doing great. But one of the things that they did was they gave her tasks, and they had called me for a reference. And I said, "Well, I'm just curious, like what stood out?" And they said, "Well, we gave her a project to do, and I think it was creating social media posts, and she created graphics to go along with it." And that really stood out as like,
Hmm.
here's somebody who is going above and beyond the expectations of the task. And yeah, so I just noticed on LinkedIn, I got an alert. Congratulate Haley Nathanson on her new job, and yeah, she's super excited. She's a fashion design PR double major from URI,
Oh,
and
cool.
she's working for a small, relatively small, very niched in brand, and she's super excited, and she's going to be doing a lot of influencer relationships. And one of the things you do in the NIM internship is you're working with a lot of our presenters and a lot of our experts and
Hmm.
promoting them, and how do we put them in their best light. And so I think that they were really pleased with the experiences that she had had. But yeah, I think bringing to the table and showing tangibles about what you have done and what you can do and how you can bring, this was the task and then this is how I completed it, is huge.
Yeah, absolutely.
It also removes a lot of the dead air from an interview, right? Like my best interviews are the ones where they ask a question and you say, and then this and this, and you figure out like when to stop talking, but you give them enough information. It's not a problem to answer the question because you know the answer, right? And that's how employers know that there's a fit, right? When you're sort of like, oh, I don't
Hmm.
know, and I don't understand the question or what have you, but when you have enough skills, and that's really what ROI in you is all about, right? Is to give you the specific skills that are needed, whether that's social media influencers or curating content or promoting events, that we've been doing really well now for a long time. And other more, if you go back, like, do you remember? Oh my God, now I'm blanking on her name. Julie. Do you remember Julie? Like way back in the beginning of NIM,
Yeah.
she's not even in digital marketing anymore. But and then Daisha. So Daisha now is director of marketing for a startup health company that has gone like really done really really well in COVID. So yeah, I mean everybody's gone on to do pretty great things, which is
I think
exciting.
I think you highlighted an interesting point there. In an interview, when you know, don't try to overfill dead air, but also if you don't have a set of experience, I'll never forget this. I was at a job interview, and they asked me to actually do some like whiteboard coding,
Oh,
and
fun.
um, I was super unclear on exactly what they were looking for, so I just kind of like winged it, and um, I'm like 95.9% sure that that code did not impress anybody, and I never heard back from them again. But my point there is like, if you don't know the answer to a question or you don't have relevant experience to kind of fit into the answer to a question, always have a an example that's maybe parallel to it, or be able to think quickly on your feet to be able to say, well, I've never done that, but I did do this other thing for somebody else, because that shows, one, what I just said. It shows you're quick on your feet. It also shows that like you can kind of bridge the gaps between, something that may be asked of you and something that may not be directly related, but could be useful. So, I think that's always important too, to be able to make those connections when you're in an interview.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. I think yeah, and also the like you said, you're not sure that you understood what they were looking for. So to ask a clarifying question so that you have a good sense of what exactly.
Sorry,
the goal is.
that also brought up another one for me. Make sure you have questions for the person you're interviewing with. That is
Mm-hmm.
like one of our when I used to do interviews, that used to be like one of my big things was, well, we want to give you a chance to ask any questions you have. Do you have any questions? Um, yeah, no, not really. Okay, so you're gonna come work for us. You have no questions whatsoever.
Yeah.
No, I'm good. Okay, great. Doesn't really necessarily paint you in the best light.
Yeah. Well, I think part of the problem with that is I don't think that if you haven't had work experience and you haven't run a business, let's just say if you have not run a business or been a key player in running of the business, that you probably don't have a very good understanding of the level of investment that giving someone a job incurs. It
Mm-hmm.
does. Like we have a new intern now, and it takes time for people to get up to speed. And this is why my internship programs, for the traditional internship program I've been running for 11 years now, it's a year-long internship because by the
Right.
time you learn and feel competent at doing things, I need to get something out of it as the business owner. So I'm happy to
Yep.
train you. I'm happy to give you all those skills. But like by the time the 2 months or 3 months summer internship is over, like I basically don't get anything out of it. I've already invested a
Mm-hmm.
lot of my time. And I think when you get into an employment situation and you're there for an interview, to have the empathy, right, of what these people are trying to achieve,
Mm-hmm.
and also I think to be okay with if they come to the decision that it's not really a good fit.
Yep. Yeah. I mean, I think you should always. I don't know. I don't want to say expect that, but I mean, I think you should be okay with the fact that like it may not be a perfect fit, and I'm always impressed by the folks who ask like, well, why wasn't it a good fit? What experience could I go get, or what could I have done better to, make myself a better
Mm-hmm.
candidate for this job? I'll actually never forget the one of the last interviews. Actually, I guess this was a couple of years ago now, as time kind of gets into that weird time warp. But um, we had somebody that we interviewed, and she didn't seem like she had enough of a knowledge base to be a fit for the position that we were looking for. But this person reached out to every single person that she interviewed with and sent them an email afterwards saying like, hey, I hope this works out. If it doesn't, I get it. And any feedback you have would be super super helpful. And when that position came up again, we all said, hey, what about this person? Like, we were all really impressed with the fact that she reached back out after the interview, and she made that personal connection. And the second time around, we ended up hiring that person.
That's so
So
great.
I think it really comes down to timing is everything, and it comes down to being personable and being able to kind of make that connection and learning from your the experience. You're not gonna get it perfect every time, and being able to understand what you can improve upon is just a part of life.
Yeah, so true. So true. I think now I'm just curious, had she had a significant amount of experience? Like how much time had elapsed between the two
I want to say
positions
it was
opening?
like 6 months maybe. So it
Oh,
wasn't it
cool.
wasn't there wasn't a ton of experience. There wasn't a ton of chance for growth there, but there was
Mm-hmm.
still some growth.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the first time around, it really came down to like, out of these two people, like which person would be a better fit. But yeah, no, I think it was pretty close, and it just ended up that she got edged out by somebody else.
Yeah, cool. Well, and good for her, right? Because if when you're applying to a growing company, right, there's always I think that's a big lesson now, especially with LinkedIn and social media and digital marketing. Um, you never want to close a door. And back in the
Hmm.
day, when you're like sending out your resume and you never hear back, it's all about nurturing the relationship, and there's so many great opportunities to do that. What do you think is a good way, whether it's in before the interview process or during the interview process, to maybe reach out to make an impression? What have you seen that might be a good idea to pass on?
So I mean, I think following up the email afterwards is definitely a good one. Following that person that you're interviewing with on LinkedIn, beforehand isn't a bad idea. It's always there's there's a fine line between creepy and appropriate. So you want to try to find that, but ultimately, being able to reference, oh, hey, I saw your post on so and so a couple days ago. Thought that was pretty interesting because of X, Y, and Z. That's again showing that you're always learning, you're always looking for interesting things to kind of pick up on and do. I think that's important. Looking at the company's website, looking at the company's social media, seeing what kind of projects they work on. That's a great way to be able to make sure that you and the company kind of share the same set of values, right? So if you look at a company and they work with a lot of nonprofits and they work in the arts and they do all this stuff and you're like, oh, I'm really into those things, you can bring that into the interview. Like, hey, I noticed you guys work with, a lot of NGOs. And a lot of arts organizations. I really love the arts. My parents were art collectors or whatever, whatever the tie-in is there. So that kind of shows that you're invested. It shows that you have a little bit of passion to the end goal and the project, the type of projects that somebody may bring you in to work on. So I think that's definitely important. And as far as other things that people can do, again, you don't want to cross over into like the creepy side of things. So you want to walk a fine line there, but anything to make more of a connection, right? Be able to show that you really do have an understanding and an interest, I think is super important.
Awesome. Yeah. And I think that that creates a good exercise, right? Because I think when people say research the company, I think there's a lot of just general advice out there that
Mm-hmm.
is not actionable, right? It's not specific enough. Like research the company. Research what? What am I supposed to be researching? Right. I
Mm-hmm.
know now, but I can guarantee you when I was 22, I didn't have that great of an idea. Um, but
And it
yeah,
doesn't
like,
it doesn't have to be overly deep research either. Like you don't
right.
have to like know, the whole leadership team and like what their favorite thing to do is and like how much money they made last year and how they spent it. Like you don't have to get that detailed. It's
That's
basically
creepy.
like
That's the definition of creepy.
right. So but you get a broad overview and like try to figure out how you're going to fit in because if you can draw that picture for the person you're interviewing for, right, then they don't have to draw it for themselves and that you've just made their job easier, which is they're in their head they're going to relate back to like this person just made my job easier, which if I hire them they'll continue to make my job easier.
Hmm.
So you want to try to take that mindset when you're doing your research.
Right. I think that's great advice. And this is what I always tell my interns when they're working on their resumes or they're applying for an internship with me is tell me how you're going to make my life easier. Like I'm busy, I got a lot of stuff going on. I run a school. I run my little micro agency. I run NIM. There's a lot of stuff going on. So tell me how you're going to, when I invest in you, how are you going to return that investment, which is the whole, that's I think is the whole crux of business, but that's particularly the crux of my brands that I manage is I want to see the return on investment, and that's really the focus because otherwise you're just sort of messing around and wasting time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, we have just a few minutes or a few seconds left, about a minute. And any last tips, Sean, that you can think of? I know that you have a lot of agency experience. You have a lot of technology experience. You're a podcaster. Any.
I have so many tips and tricks and things like that. I think the last one here, and this is a question you'd asked me previously, was about podcasting and getting young professionals into podcasting. I think overall, like if you're a young professional, you're just getting out there and you think you might be interested in podcasting, you probably want to try to go on to somebody else's podcast or become a regular on a podcast that you don't really have much to do with other than provide content first, just to see if you like it and see if it feels natural for you. And then, if that works out, you've done that for a couple months, then maybe look into what it takes to build a podcast. Most podcasts don't get off the ground and don't get past a few first couple of episodes, because there's not only the content piece of it, but there's also the distribution, the social media publicizing of it, and the post-production of it. So there's a lot that goes into it. I think ultimately something that could be easier is YouTube. There are plenty of people jumping on YouTube, posting videos. I know Suzanne and I have talked about John O'Bacon, but he produces great YouTube videos about community development and things like that. And I think that's potentially could be the way of the future. It could be a replacement for podcasting down the road. But I think that's a much lower barrier to entry to get into, because YouTube, you basically record the video and then it has tools built in to help you kind of edit it down and whatnot. So
Right. That's a really good point, right? As far as being able to manage the quality. Yeah. And that was a game changer when YouTube instituted those editing features, right? Just right within there. It just makes things so much easier. It's not perfect, right? It's not like extremely user friendly. There's a lot of, like most Google products.
yeah,
There's
you
always
gotta
room
you
for
gotta watch a
improvement.
YouTube video or two to get the gist of it. But once you watch those a couple of times, and if you're doing it regularly, it works out pretty well. I organize a Drupal meetup, and I actually record the video via Zoom, and then take that video when I download it, upload it to YouTube, rewatch the video on how to edit it because I forget every time, and then edit it and put it out, and that's it. It's done. And it takes a couple hours to record the content and to get it up there and posted. So yeah, it's definitely becoming a lot easier.
Nice. Yeah, that sounds really good. Well, I'm hoping that Ecamm, which is the platform I'm using, like if I strip out the audio tracks, it has one track for you and one track for me. And I want like one audio track that has both of us. So then I can just upload that right away, which would make, it would save a bunch of steps. And I think from a technical perspective, how hard could that be?
Not
Yeah.
hard. I mean, just merge them together.
Yeah. So, yeah, what we do is we put it into, Noah, our intern right now, he puts it into iMovie and then just strips out the audio track. But wouldn't it be so much easier if I could just click a button and it would just upload as one single track? Um, but there we are.
Technology sometimes makes your life easier, but also sometimes makes your life harder.
Oh yes, yeah. As we spent the first half hour witnessing. But awesome. All right. Well, thank you so much, John. This is so great, and everybody can find you on LinkedIn. Can find you through me
Absolutely.
on LinkedIn, and thank you again for taking the time to share your career success tips.
Anytime. Thanks a lot.